Chris is going to talk to us a little bit more about metrics. And Chris and I have worked together for a long, long time. He's one of my very favorite sans humans. And I think it takes a very special kind of smart person to explain really complicated and potentially boring things, because numbers are boring to me, in a way that is simple and understandable. And Chris is just really good at that. So you're in for a treat with his talk now. I promise it won't be boring. He has never bored me yet, even when he talks about
boring stuff. I'm talking about boring stuff. I actually agree with that. I just want to make sure you can see my using Security Operations Center metrics development awareness program. Yeah, you can see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I actually do sincerely try to take things which would otherwise be boring and make them interesting. And I'm going to put the takeaways up front that I really hope that you, in hearing my talk today, go back to work and try to do a few things. First of all, verify that your SOC is producing metrics, and the ones that they are producing, look at how they're producing them, think about improving those, think about improving the way that that is reported. And I'm going to talk about reporting context and audience. I would really also like for you to think about developing data-centric messaging suitable for delivery to both your employees and your customers. And very importantly, help the SOC to help itself in order to make sure that the organization understands what the SOC really can do and what it should be doing. Because unfortunately, in the consulting that I do, I find that some people are, they expect the wrong thing from a security operations center. What a security operations center can provide to you is, and your organization, is gracefully minimizing damage in the midst of uncertainty. Don't try to turn the SOC into something that's 100% routine. They are the entity which is supposed to be dealing with the problems as those problems are arising. Okay. So in order to make sense of this and where I'm coming from in the context of things, I would like to start with what I describe SOCs as in terms of functional areas. And you can find a bunch of information. I have already posted a couple of links in the hallway channel for more details on this. But the idea of a security operations center is there should be some steering committee of some form that helps through representation of the organization to the SOC of what the SOC is supposed to do. And the SOC has that steering committee as a venue in order to ask questions, collect information, and so on. Command center is the interface from the SOC to the constituents of the SOC, the operational receipt of requests for assistance, the dissemination of information, the communication of information back out to those constituents that the SOC is helping. And so this is where I see some security awareness, communication occurring from within these functions. Monitoring is detection of issues. Threat intelligence is the study of our adversaries. Incident handling is dealing with the problem when the problem comes up. Forensic analysis is deep dive, thorough, authoritative investigation of data assets in order to answer questions. And self-assessment is all of the things that the organization needs done in terms of proactively hardening the information systems that we're dealing with. Self-assessment is baseline development. It's vulnerability management. It's the deployment of patches. It's the appropriate configuration. It's the pen testing. It's the development of exercises, and development of exercises both for the SOC and for the constituents and customers. And this is another place where I see the security awareness type activities in place. So this is my mindset and where I'm coming from as I'm talking about these different topics. And so when I talk about metrics, and I have probably about 30 or 40 different metrics that I tend to talk about with people. I really am not going to talk about all of those today. I just have a few. I don't have a lot of time to go into the details. But one incredibly important thing that I want a security operations center to do is to differentiate the audience for the metrics. A reported metric, I want to have a service level agreement type metric, an internal type metric where this is held inside of the SOC, but still useful for directing action in order to move the SOC into the right sort of performance, and user messaging. And you may need to do tailoring of this user messaging between what we send to our internal employees and what we send to our customers, right? If you're a bank, you have different guidance that you're going to be sending out to your customers. And you may also then start to tailor that depending upon the sort of customer. The customers who are in the brokerage accounts versus the customers who are using a business account type system versus the customers who are using a personal banking. And so that's what I mean when I say maybe tailored. So based on the role that the person has and the risk that's associated with that. And when you're thinking about what you are giving to employees or customers, and I'm just going to use the general term users now, as users of our information systems, they need a little bit of metric type data, but what would be better for them is actually forecasting. And as I think about how to effectively communicate to individuals, I think about forecasting, and when I have that thought, it leads me immediately to weather. What are the couple of things that I need to know on a regular basis coming out of my weather forecast? I need to know the likelihood of precipitation, and I need to know the temperature, because that is going to affect what I choose to wear when I go outside. And so you should be thinking in terms of the parallels from weather forecasting in terms of what you're communicating to your users. And from the functions that I just described in terms of my security operations, I suggest that you actually develop a forecasting team to help to formulate the information that is disseminated to your users. And this would be something that you could start with a monthly. This would probably be better to do weekly, and if at all possible, eventually daily. The idea with this is these functions provide data and, where appropriate, additional guidance in terms of what that data means in order to express to the users of the information systems what is likely to be seen. This should be based in the data that they are collecting and is a forecast, a projection, a depiction of what is going to occur in the future. This will be necessarily inaccurate. Okay? And the point is not to get it exactly right. The point is to refine it over time. And so, as a start, what I would like you to think about in terms of the forecast, which you would provide to your users, I suggest that you have a personal, a corporate, and a competitive section of this. Personal is, here's how you as an individual should be vigilant. Okay, these are the sort of things which our cybersecurity effort has identified, which isn't specifically relevant to our business, but because you are part of our organization and we want you to stay safe individually and personally. This is how you could approach this from a vigilance perspective. Mobile applications are being used to basically track people's locations under the fake installer of a COVID contact tracker. As an example, that would be a relevant a relevant circumstance where you have this sort of thing, right? Corporate type information and forecasting is, here's the sort of phishing that we're seeing. Here's basically a data loss which occurred, and people will probably try to use that data in order to conduct fraud, right? And so on. And then the competitive notion is, in our space with the business environment that we're dealing with, what sort of things are we seeing where you are being targeted to collect information on these specific things. This is what our threat intelligence is showing us that we're being targeted on. Okay? And so we also have our threat landscape. This is a product from Threat Intel in order to share that information with our users. The self-assessment team can be highlighting issues, ongoing issues that they're identifying in their vulnerability management program and so on. And then I have this severe weather sort of thing, which these are unusual circumstances that we're dealing with right now. And they're coming up imminently, and they're dangerous, and you need to be aware of that. That's the sort of weather forecasting that if you take the data that you have in your SOC and you work with that forecasting team and produce a report like that, then you will be doing your users a tremendous service. Another thing that I want you to do is user awareness training, as in make the SOC aware of the fact that part of what they need to protect are the users, right? Unfortunately, a lot of people in our security operations lose sight of the fact that ultimately the protection which they are providing is to our information systems, which includes the people who are using those information systems. And unfortunately, our security operations centers have this skewed perspective of what users mean to them. I would like you to talk to your SOC employees. Maybe this is the one person, right, who's doing all the stuff. Maybe this is, 40 or 50 people that do shift work, and talk to them about what they understand about the people that they're helping to protect. One of the things that I talk about in terms of running security operations is the differentiation between use cases and hunting. Hunting is ad hoc inspection of data which is available to us. Use cases are engineered detections in order to trigger on conditions where we have circumstances where we can actually articulate, this looks bad, that looks okay, right? And so we can do that differentiation. Part of the hunting program that I advocate is to actually hunt the systems which are present in the organization, and also to identify people who are responsible for and using those systems. This is something that I do in order to help the Security Operations Center to realize it's people who are involved in our information systems. This is not the person's the weakest link or anything like that. This is part of the defensive topography which you are responsible for helping to protect. Okay. Stop telling me to encase computers and drop them to the bottom of the ocean, and then, encase computers in concrete and drop them to the bottom of the ocean, and then the data will be safe. That doesn't work for us, right? We need to actually do this in a way where things are actually operational. Another thing which I advocate for in our information system protection is the idea of defining success. I would like you to challenge the Security Operations Center by saying, what is it that you all do? Do you have a statement of success? Do you have some express, defined articulation of how you are successful? And this is something that if you do not have that already written, I think it should be in a charter of your Security Operations Center, but oftentimes it doesn't exist at all. So here's a place to start. The SOC is successful when it intervenes in adversary efforts to impact the availability, confidentiality, and integrity of my organization's information assets. And it does this by proactively making systems more resilient to impact and reactively detecting, containing, and eliminating adversary capability. And all of the metrics should ultimately roll up to help to accomplish this success. That's what we're going for. That's the whole reason why we're building out metrics for this. And when you go back to work, Friday or Monday or this evening or tomorrow morning, check to see if your SOC actually has a statement of success. And if they do have a statement of success, check to see if it's a good one, the sort of one that you would be comfortable taking that and saying it to your executives, to the people throughout your organization. Is it a good one? Do you believe in it? Does the SOC believe in it? Do they actively think about accomplishing that success? Because if they don't have one and it isn't a good one and they don't believe in it, then you need to adjust that. And once you've adjusted that, then go see if you can socialize it in order to make it so that the organization agrees that it is the right thing. And so we want to make sure that our success is agreed upon between the people doing the defense and the people who are the constituents who are being defended. What does success mean? Once success is agreed upon, then we can think about measuring that success and pushing things forward in order to make it better. How do we push it forward to make it better? We measure our accomplishments, we compare it to what our expectations are, and we adjust as needed. I have found that there are a lot of metrics which can be collected and tracked, which drive what I call perverse behavior. There are a lot of metrics that if this is the only thing that the analyst is being judged upon, it will actually change their behavior for the worse, not for the better. Okay. As an example, the idea of how many incidents did you handle? If I'm judged on having a very small number of incidents that were handled, I can probably make it so that there are almost none by not finding them. Now, that doesn't enhance the defensive posture of the organization in any way by me not finding incidents, but it does satisfy the metric pretty effectively. Okay, so be aware of the perversion of behavior as a result of the metrics that we're actually doing. So I think that our metrics take a couple of different forms. One of which is the idea of reported. This is something which I would report to my steering committee, which might also be cascaded up to some other groups like a board of directors. And I'm going to pick one specific one for my reporting. And I call this incident avoidability. In incident avoidability, there are 3 buckets. There are no in-betweens. There's no 2.4. It's a 1, a 2, or a 3. A 1 is defined as some measure which is available to the environment, was not implemented, and there was no good reason that we did not implement that particular measure. This is a configuration change. This is a patch. This is a thing that we simply didn't do it, and that hurt us. That's what caused the incident. Was the incident avoidable? Yes, it absolutely was. Did we avoid it? No, we did not. A 2 is the measure is available to us, but there's some specific choice that we made that we did not implement that for some reason, right? We chose not to implement that patch. We chose not to implement that configuration for financial reasons, for political reasons, for resource reasons, and that ended up hurting us. That's a 2. And a 3 is 0-day space, right? There was nothing that was technically available in the environment in order to stop that particular attack. And that actually is what was used in order to attack us. Okay. And so one thing that I think would be really interesting to do on a business unit type basis is to count the quantity of incidents of type 1, type 2, type 3, and report that on a regular basis. And this is something that I specifically advocate to the SOC to report to the steering committee. And I actually think that this is so important that it is appropriate potentially to report it to all the users inside of an information system. I probably wouldn't report this to customers, but to my users in a generic organization, I would probably report something like this to everybody. It may be for you, for your company's culture, you could only give the incidents of certain type in your specific business unit. Okay, I mean, I don't get the enterprise-wide comparison, but I think that might be valuable. And hold this one in mind because I'm going to come back to this at the end of the talk after I go through a couple of other things. So this next topic is something that I want people to keep straight: the separation between a metric and a service level objective. Service level objective implies the notion of a specific level of performance being expected. Service level objectives help me to understand what resources I need in order to be able to do things within a certain amount of time and a certain level of precision with a certain number of parallel operations in order to be able to do this. So a good example of a user facing service level objective is the notion of initial communication related to a security incident. And this isn't when the alert got into the SIM. This is when somebody in the SOC had the realization, hey, this might be bad, right? This actually might be a bad thing. This is not a false positive. This is not something that we're missing. This is not something that was a misfire. This is actually really potentially bad. I need to tell somebody about this. When that analyst has that realization, this initial notification time starts ticking for the service level objective that's in place. The danger of reporting too quickly is too many questions come back to the SOC and the SOC doesn't have the answers yet. The danger of waiting too long, Well, I mean, the people who should be involved in the incident handling now are excluded from that conversation. Uh, Ideas of service level objectives around communication between the SOC and the constituents, incredibly important. Daily updates at a minimum, that's a service level objective. Maybe the organization demands hourly updates. Okay, well then we need to change our procedures from the SOC in order to meet that mandate, that service level that the organization expects. In terms of other things that we might talk about, for reporting and communication, dissemination of information, what if our vulnerability scan identifies that your system has a critical patch that's missing? Like, how quickly should I share that? Do you want me to share threat intelligence with you? How can I share that with you in order to make that actionable for you? Okay, from a constituent perspective with the SOC. In terms of the internal metrics to the SOC, there are loads of things that the SOC should be tracking and frankly not sharing. And so one simple example of this is I think that every SOC analyst should have a baseball card. Like, I don't watch sports, I don't care, but it's a good sort of way of talking about tracking the performance of the analysts in the SOC. Okay, how do we determine whether these SOC analysts are actually doing well or not? And I think that the SOC should be responsible for doing that. I don't think that this baseball card should be sent out to the organization, but this is an example of an internal SOC metric that is really quite effective at positive change in terms of individuals' behaviors. And if you want a laundry list of different metrics that you can potentially gather, this talk that Carson Zimmerman and I collaborated on, that he gave at FIRST, the Forum of Incident Responders, and something else. I can never remember what that acronym stands for, but you can download that PDF from that FIRST metrics. And I think that same link shortener, mgt517.com/first-video, will take you to the recording of Carson giving that talk. Carson and I have collaborated on a number of different things. Carson's really great. He currently works at Microsoft. He previously worked at MITRE and wrote a fantastic book on security operations. The next thing that I want to talk about is the notion of impact. This, again, is such a central thing to metrics that the way that I'm about to say this, it seems really easy. What I'm about to advocate for is really, really hard to get the traction, to get everybody in agreement that this is going to work. However, if you invest the time in getting this effort, even in big sort of buckets of categories, you have accomplished something that many organizations will never accomplish, which is the quantification of impact. And if you can quantify impact from problems, then you really are on a pathway in order to drive improvement. And so I'm using NIST. This is actually derived originally from SP 861. And US CERT has publication around this: low, moderate, and high. And of course, low, moderate, and high, we think that we know what that means. I would ask you, do you have guidance for your analysts on how to differentiate low, moderate, high? And do your constituents of your security operations agree with that guidance of low, moderate, and high when we categorize things? When I talk to people in security operations centers, there's almost never guidance on this, and it's almost never vetted by the constituents of the SOC. The next thing that I think is important as a dimension in order to be able to express impact quantification is this three-part depiction. You could add to this. I don't think you want to subtract from this, but you could add to this if you have additional components. Functional is the idea of an interruption of the system's operation. Informational is damage to the data. This might be a breach of data. This might be a modification of the data in an unauthorized fashion. And recoverability is how resilient the system is to faults. Okay. And so what I would like you to do is to build the sort of chart, and I'm going to talk through what it looks like for buckets of systems. Okay. And let's just start with the idea of workstation servers and network infrastructure. Right. So thinking about network infrastructure, servers generically, and workstations generically. If you can just do those three, you will be on your pathway to then being more granular. I suggest to you to not start at the very granular level, because this is so hard to get agreement upon initially, that you just want to start with the big things for the discussion, and then you can start to get a more nuanced depiction of the quantification of impact. And so you start with a list of systems, you put them into the buckets, you then enumerate your buckets and pick one. I suggest that you start with a 3, 5, 9 quantity for your low, moderate, and high for that particular system. Okay, low, moderate, and high. The point of this is that you're going to have a comparative analysis between different systems. Low, moderate, high has different quantity values per system. Part of making this chart is being able to actually differentiate that. For the importance of the system to the organization, you then express functional, informational, and recoverable. Some stuff, it needs to be up all the time, but the data is less important. Other stuff, the data is really important, but if it's down for a couple of days, it actually wouldn't matter. The organization would tolerate this. And so for each of these values, I'm using a scale of 1 through 10, and I am then going to end up with a quantity on a per system basis for when there's a low, a moderate, or a high impact to the system's functional, informational integrity, and recoverability of that system. So if I think that the system can be recovered and I'm not able to do that effectively, then that would be a high impact, right? I thought that I had the resources on hand to be able to recover, but that backhoe showed me that I didn't have the right sort of network infrastructure in place in order to be able to make that work. Okay. And so with this, I end up with a per system depiction of impact for that system according to the organization. You can see why you don't want to start with 50 of these things. You want to start with 3 in order to be able to run through the conversation, in order to be able to articulate that impact quantity on a per system basis. Then anytime that there is a cybersecurity incident that the SOC identifies, they assess the low, moderate, or high impact, and then they use the pre-agreed upon matrix in order to count the value for that particular impact. Okay. And so this now all of a sudden gives us a quantitative evaluation schema for comparing risk from incidents. Okay. And what this ends up being for us is a way that we can now, with each cybersecurity incident which we experience, identify in a comparative way from incident to incident what the damage was. Now, this also can roll back to our idea of avoidability, where if the security operations assesses that this was avoidable, right, based on their root cause analysis, and we had a couple of incidents of an avoidable type, what we can now do is actually say, here were the ones that were avoidable, but they didn't really cause us much damage, so not that big of a deal. But we might also have circumstances where we have things that were avoidable and caused us a lot of damage, right? And if that's the case, we should then go look at those circumstances and really focus on resolving those issues. And if we have cases where we have a type 3, this is the one where it's like there was nothing available in the environment to really stop it. Well, I mean, we're going to have some of that, but that also suggests which of the business units are being forcefully targeted by more advanced adversaries. So this, to me, would be something that would be really useful to get to the point where you can articulate this to your users in order to tell them what's happening in your environment, could we have avoided it, and how bad it was. And to identify within the different subgroups of the organization, and I'm calling it business unit, but this can be whatever you want to say, within the various subgroups of your organization, how likely you are to have problems and how that compares to other subgroups within the organization. So a couple example metrics. I know that that's not a ton of time, I didn't have a ton of time to go into a long laundry list of the different metrics that were present. So I cherry picked a few in order to be able to express it. So other stuff from me, if you want to take a look at it, I've got a YouTube channel. I've got some security operations presentations. I've got the 2020 SOC survey results coming out here in December at the CDI keynote. So thank you, and sorry for running a little over.